What if what you call the real world is not real at all? What if it's only a dream that learned to disguise itself as waking life? Every morning we open our eyes and step into the same theatre of objects and routines, and we call that continuity proof of reality. But repetition does not make something real. It only makes it familiar. The mind loves familiarity. It takes comfort in predictability. Yet comfort and truth have never been the same thing. The world you see around you, the solid, unquestionable realm of streets, houses, calendars, governments, and faces, is a hallucination agreed upon by billions of human beings. It's a consensus trance so stable that we have forgotten we're participating in it. Think about it. The world you inhabit is built from interpretations, not from raw data. Your senses collect fragments, waves of light, vibrations in air, chemical impulses on the tongue, and your nervous system translates them into an organized picture. You never perceive the thing itself. You perceive the translation your brain generates. You are always one step removed from the real. And then, even that translation is filtered again through culture, through the words you inherited before you could even think. We are born into language like fish into water, and from the moment we first hear a word, we begin to mistake its sound for truth. The world is spoken into being. The infant does not know where I ends and world begins. Only through language does the separation emerge, and with it, the illusion of solidity. This is the first layer of the hallucination, perception itself. You see a chair and say chair, but what you truly perceive is color and shape, pattern and contrast. The label binds the experience into an object. It freezes something fluid. Language makes the infinite manageable, but in doing so, it cages it. This is how the dream becomes structured, through words, categories, and social agreements. The mind, terrified of chaos, clings to these verbal islands as if they were land. Yet behind every word, reality continues to flow, alive and unnameable. When you truly look, when you stop narrating, the world begins to dissolve back into energy, into shimmering flux. You might say, but if this is a hallucination, how can we all see the same things? How can we agree on the same sun, the same streets, the same pain? Consensus. That's the spell. You were born. They encoded this comfort into myths, religions, and languages. Over time, the symbols hardened into dogmas. We forgot that these were just metaphors. We began to worship the map instead of exploring the territory. The hallucination became self-sustaining. It began to defend itself against any who dared to question it. That's why genuine awakenings, moments of seeing through the illusion, are often met with suspicion or ridicule. To the dreamers still asleep, the lucid one appears insane. And yet, there are cracks in the mask of the real. Sometimes you notice them, a fleeting déjà vu, a sudden sense that the world is watching you back, that everything is made of the same luminous fabric. These moments are like openings in the simulation, glimpses into the fluid nature of being. They terrify the ego because they reveal that nothing is truly fixed, that your identity, your memories, even your body are patterns in the same vibrating field. The you who perceives is part of the hallucination too. There is no observer standing outside the dream. The dream is dreaming itself through you. You can test this directly. Close your eyes and ask, where is the world right now? Without your senses, without your labels, without thought, where is it? The room, the sky, your name, all vanish the moment you stop holding them with attention. Reality collapses like an unplugged hologram. It reappears the instant you return your focus to it. So which is more real? The image that comes and goes, or the awareness in which it arises? The world flickers in and out of being depending on the direction of your gaze, like light shimmering on the surface of water. Consciousness, not matter, is the constant background. The real world is a performance within that infinite stage. But we have forgotten our role as co-authors. We treat the hallucination as an external authority, as if we were merely guests in someone else's dream. We obey its rules without question. We call it normal. We anchor ourselves to clocks, currencies, and calendars, and we call this imprisonment stability. Yet beneath that mechanical rhythm, the ancient pulse of the cosmos still beats. The same pulse that moved through the first cell, the same current that whispers in the forests and oceans. Reality is not something we live in, it's something we're continuously creating. Every thought, every word, every act of attention contributes to the collective spell. The shared hallucination is participatory. It requires your belief to exist. And here lies the paradox. The world is simultaneously real and unreal. Real because we experience it fully. Unreal because it depends on perception and agreement. Like a dream that feels vivid until you wake. When you understand this, you begin to hold reality lightly. You stop clinging to the solidity of things and start to see their fluid essence. The table, the city, the stars, all of them are shimmering patterns of meaning within consciousness. Even the laws of physics are only the most stable habits of this collective imagination. The universe is not a machine but a language, a living conversation between matter and mind. And we, the speakers, have forgotten that we're speaking. To call this a hallucination is not to dismiss it, but to recognize its nature. A hallucination is a perception created from within, projected outward. That's precisely what existence is, a luminous projection of the inner void, shaped by the filters of biology, language, and culture. We are surrounded not by things, but by metaphors pretending to be things. Every object is a story frozen in form. When you walk through the city, you are walking through condensed imagination. The buildings, the symbols, the laws, all are artifacts of thought. The real world is an architecture of accumulated dreams. The tragedy is not that we live in a hallucination, it's that we forgot we do. Forgetting turns the dream into a prison. Remembering turns it into art. Once you glimpse the illusory fabric of the real, you are free to reshape it, to rewrite it. You no longer move like a sleepwalker through the maze of conventions. You become a lucid dreamer in the infinite imagination of existence. And yet, this awakening does not distance you from life. It deepens your intimacy with it. When you know the world is a dream, every moment becomes sacred. Every face, every sound, every fleeting sensation becomes a brushstroke in the cosmic painting of consciousness. So when you next step into the real world, look again. Watch the way people move, the way they speak, the way they build meanings together. See the invisible web of assumptions binding everything in place. Realize that you are both the observer and the observed, the storyteller and the story. The dream is not happening to you, it's happening through you. The question is not whether it's real, but whether you can remember that you're dreaming, without falling back asleep. Because the moment you do, the hallucination shifts, the world bends, and you, the dreamer, awaken inside your own creation, finally understanding what McKenna meant, that what you call the real world is simply the most persistent hallucination humanity has ever shared. Language is the invisible architect of the world we inhabit. It builds the walls of our perception, carves out the boundaries of what we can think, and fills the void of raw experience with shimmering illusions of meaning. Terence McKenna called it the psychedelic technology par excellence, a self-replicating code that not only describes reality, but constructs it. Before words, the world was a field of undivided sensation. There was no separation between the seer and the seen. Existence was a seamless flow, vibrations of light, sound, taste, and emotion blending in a single vast awareness. Then came the spell of language. With the first word, the infinite was split. We begin to think the world itself is made of them. The word becomes the thing. The name becomes the truth. We mistake the symbol for the experience. And so we live, not in the world itself, but in the world our words have created. This is what McKenna meant when he said that culture is a linguistic hallucination. The languages we speak, English, Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, are not neutral tools. They are ancient operating systems, coded with assumptions about time, self, gender, morality, and space. Every language cuts the universe into a different pattern. To speak one is to inhabit a particular version of reality. A speaker of Hopi perceives time as cyclical. A speaker of English perceives it as linear. In some tongues, there are dozens of words for snow. In others, none. What we can think is limited by what we can name, and so, our shared hallucination is sustained not just by culture, but by the grammar beneath it. We are entranced not only by words, but by the invisible logic that organizes them, the syntax of thought itself. Language hypnotizes through repetition. It loops endlessly, defining and redefining, trapping awareness inside an echo chamber of meaning. You talk to yourself silently all day, narrating your life in a stream of symbols, never realizing that this inner voice is not you. It is the language speaking through you. It whispers, "I am hungry, I am sad, I am late," and you believe it, as if those words were direct windows into reality. But they are not. They are metaphors, useful, yes, but never complete. And yet, through this self-talk, we maintain the illusion of a solid identity. The ego is a linguistic construct, a grammatical fiction. It exists because your mind keeps saying I. When you stop naming yourself, the boundary between you and the world dissolves. Silence reveals what language hides, that consciousness has no edge, that the world is not separate from the one perceiving it. Consider how entire civilizations are programmed through language. The media doesn't show us the world. It tells us what the world means. A single phrase like freedom, terrorism, or progress carries entire architectures of belief. Each word triggers neural pathways, emotions, and behaviors. Words are not inert, they are psychoactive. They enter the mind and rearrange it. That's why propaganda works, why advertising seduces, why political rhetoric can lead nations into madness. Every society runs on a specific linguistic frequency, a shared myth maintained by speech. Because when the spell breaks, reality reveals itself as raw, shimmering presence, before thought, before description, before naming. It's not that language is evil, it's that we forgot it's a tool. Like fire, it can warm or consume. When used unconsciously, it burns. When used consciously, it illuminates. The danger of language lies in its invisibility. You can't see it, yet it shapes everything you see. You don't notice the lens until it cracks. The moment you glimpse reality outside of words, perhaps in meditation, or under the influence of a psychedelic, or in a moment of awe, you realize how small your linguistic world really is. Suddenly, the categories collapse. Tree, sky, me, you, all dissolve into one vibrating continuum. This is not metaphor. It's a direct perception of the living field beneath language. You realize that words are like scaffolding around infinity. They allow us to build structures of meaning, but they can never contain the vastness of what is. Once you see this, you begin to use language differently. You stop trying to trap reality in sentences and start to let language dance. You use it like a painter uses color, aware that every brushstroke is only an approximation of light. There's a peculiar paradox here. Only through language can we talk about its limits. To point beyond it, we must still use it. That's why mystical texts are often poetic, circular, paradoxical. They are using language to undermine itself, to lead the mind to the edge of silence. McKenna understood this deeply. His own speech spiraled through recursive metaphors, fractal jokes, and cosmic laughter, not to impress, but to destabilize. He spoke in a way that revealed the fluidity of meaning, the shimmering play of symbols that reality itself seems to enjoy. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He was trying to remind us that everything we believe is built from sound, that to awaken is to realize that the world is made of language, and that language is dreaming. In everyday life, this insight can feel distant. The grocery store, the office, the screen, all seem solid, unsentimental, concrete. But even there, the spell is active. The products you buy, the numbers you fear, the goals you chase, All are linguistic constructs given physical form. Money, for example, is pure language. It's an agreement, a story told by billions of people simultaneously. The paper or digits mean nothing without belief, and yet that belief organizes economies, empires, and futures. Words move armies. Words build religions. Words define love and death. This is how powerful the hallucination is. It uses sound to shape matter, thought to shape destiny. The real world is, in truth, a linguistic echo chamber vibrating inside human consciousness. To awaken from this spell is not to abandon language, but to see through it. When you realize that every word is a choice, that every phrase carries intention, you begin to speak differently. Your words become spells of creation rather than instruments of control. You choose words that open rather than close, that reveal rather than conceal. And as your language changes, so does your perception. You start to see that the world is more fluid than you were taught, that it responds to the quality of attention and the vibration of expression. To speak with awareness is to weave reality consciously. To listen deeply is to touch the silence from which all words emerge. In the end, the spell of language can only be broken by awareness. Awareness that words are not reality, but reflections of it. Awareness that silence is not emptiness, but the womb of all meaning. Awareness that the real world is a story we tell together, a shared hallucination sustained by words whispered generation after generation. And once you see that, you can laugh. You can play again. You can speak truth not as dogma, but as poetry. Because when you know that the world is made of language, every sentence becomes sacred, every conversation a chance to rewrite the dream. And perhaps that's the real purpose of speech, not to describe reality, but to remind it of its own infinite imagination. Culture is the great dream we forgot we were dreaming. It surrounds us like air, invisible and unquestioned, shaping not only what we see, but what we can even imagine seeing. Terence McKenna often called it a mass hallucination, a shared narrative so old and so convincing that it passes for the truth itself. Every culture, no matter how advanced or primitive, is essentially a set of agreed-upon hallucinations, a web of stories that define what is real, what is important, and who we are within it. We inherit this web at birth, long before we have the power to question it. By the time we are old enough to ask what is real, the hallucination has already fused with our nervous system. It becomes the background hum of life, the unexamined rhythm of our thoughts. From the moment we are born, culture begins to write its script across our minds. It teaches us where the borders of possibility lie. It defines the sacred and the profane, the sane and the mad, the normal and the deviant. It whispers in our ear through television, through textbooks, through religion, through the voices of parents and peers, shaping us into characters in a story that none of us remember choosing. This is success, it says. This is failure. This is love. This is death. The tragedy is not that culture lies. It doesn't have to. The tragedy is that we mistake its metaphors for truth. We forget that we are the authors and start to believe we are merely characters. Culture's power lies in its invisibility. It pretends to be reality itself. The city skyline, the flag, the calendar, the currency, all of these are artifacts of imagination that have hardened into the unquestionable. When we look around, we see not the world, but a museum of inherited meanings. Even our emotions are programmed responses. Our desires and fears have been rehearsed for us by generations who lived and died under the same spell. The culture tells us what to want and then sells us the method to get it. It tells us what to fear and then offers salvation, political, religious, technological. It is a self-perpetuating loop, endlessly feeding on belief. And because everyone around us participates in the same loop, its unreality is almost impossible to notice. The shared dream is stable precisely because it is shared. Imagine for a moment that you were raised in a completely different symbolic world, one with no money, no religion, no idea of property, no concept of time as linear progress. would you still perceive reality in the same way? The answer, of course, is no. You would live in a different universe altogether. The world you inhabit is built not of atoms, but of agreements. These agreements are sustained by repetition. The same myths are retold through movies, news, and education until they form the structure of everyday life. We call this society, but it is more accurately a dream of society, a collective projection whose rules are enforced through persuasion and fear rather than force. Culture is not your friend, McKenna warned, because it does not want you to wake up. It wants you to play your part, to keep the dream stable, to keep the machinery of belief running smoothly. And yet, deep down, something in us remembers a different order of reality. There are moments, often small, often fleeting, when the cultural dream flickers. It might happen while walking alone at night, when the noise of civilization fades and the raw hum of existence breaks through, or in the silence of a forest, where the mind momentarily forgets its categories and sees the world as a living, breathing organism rather than a collection of resources. In those moments, the consensus hallucination loosens its grip, and we glimpse the vast mystery underneath. The colors seem brighter, the air thicker, time slower. You realize that what you called the real world was just one version of reality among countless others. And the realization is both liberating and terrifying, because it reveals how fragile our shared reality truly is. The mechanisms of culture depend on fear of that fragility. Society maintains order by keeping us convinced that its rules are absolute. Break them, and you risk exile. Question them, and you are labeled strange, dangerous, insane. That fear keeps most people asleep, comfortably numb within the boundaries of the hallucination. But every now and then, someone steps beyond the walls. Artists, mystics, shamans, visionaries, those who dare to look behind the curtain. They return speaking in riddles and metaphors, trying to describe what they've seen. A reality without fixed meaning, a universe made of mind, a cosmos dreaming itself into form. The culture, terrified of such revelations, often treats these individuals as heretics or fools. Yet these are the ones who keep the possibility of awakening alive. Culture is, at its core, a survival mechanism. It organizes chaos into order, gives meaning to suffering, and creates continuity across generations. But when it ceases to evolve, it becomes a cage. It turns the mystery of existence into bureaucracy. It reduces the infinite to a marketable brand. We see this in the modern world more clearly than ever. Our cultural hallucination has become globalized, digitized, monetized, weaponized. The old myths of nation, race, and religion have merged with the new myth of technology, the promise that progress will save us. But this promise, too, is just a story. It hides the fact that we are accelerating toward ecological collapse, existential confusion, and spiritual emptiness. The more the hallucination expands, the more it consumes the real. McKenna believed that the antidote to this collective trance lies in the individual's direct experience of reality, unmediated by culture. He spoke of psychedelic states not merely as chemical events, but as tools to dissolve the cultural programming, to reveal the code beneath the illusion. Psychedelics, art, meditation. These are ways of rebooting the system, of reminding ourselves that the walls of the hallucination are made of thought. When those walls collapse, even for a moment, we realize that we have always been free. The universe does not need our permission to be miraculous. It only needs our attention. And that attention, pure, unfiltered awareness, is what culture has trained us to avoid. Because attention, when turned inward, destroys the illusion of control. It reveals that the emperor of consensus reality has no clothes. To live outside the hallucination does not mean rejecting culture entirely. It means seeing it for what it is, a tool, not a truth. Culture can be beautiful when treated as art, when its stories are recognized as metaphors rather than commandments. But the danger begins when we forget that the metaphors are metaphors. Then we become prisoners of our own imagination. worshipping the dream instead of the dreamer. The challenge of awakening in this age is not to escape the world, but to see through it, to realize that the city and the forest, the screen and the silence are all expressions of the same living consciousness. Culture is the canvas, awareness is the painter. The moment you remember that, the hallucination becomes luminous again. You can walk through the city streets and see the symbols for what they are: temporary, fluid, alive. The spell breaks, not with destruction, but with recognition. To see culture as a shared dream is not cynicism, it is liberation. It means you are no longer bound by its hypnotic narratives of success and failure, of time and progress. You can participate in the story consciously, like an actor aware of the stage. You can play your role without being consumed by it. The true rebel, McKenna said, is not the one who burns the system, but the one who wakes up from it. Because once you awaken, you realize the system never existed in the way you thought it did. It was a mirage projected by the collective imagination, held together by language, belief, and fear. And when you step beyond that mirage, you discover that the universe is far stranger, far more alive than culture ever allowed you to believe. In the end, the shared hallucination is not the enemy, it is the mirror. Through it, consciousness learns to see itself. The dream of culture is the dream of the species evolving toward awareness, stumbling through its own stories until it recognizes that it was never asleep at all. Every myth, every ideology, every art form is the cosmos speaking in its sleep, trying to remember its true nature. When we awaken from the hallucination of culture, we don't destroy it, we redeem it. We transform it into play, into creation, into celebration. Because only when you realize that the real world was never real to begin with, can you finally begin to live. The crack in the consensus is where the light gets in. It begins as a subtle tremor, a quiet unease that something about the real world doesn't quite add up. You might feel it standing in a crowded street, watching people hurry by, their faces absorbed by glowing rectangles, each one locked into a private simulation of meaning. You might feel it in the stillness of night, when the silence between thoughts stretches a little longer than usual, and the familiar shape of the world flickers. It's not madness. It's the first breath of awakening, the recognition that the collective hallucination of culture and language is not airtight. There are seams in the fabric of the dream, and through them, something vast and ancient is calling you back. Terence McKenna often said that the shaman, the poet, and the visionary are those who notice the cracks and dare to slip through. They are the ones who stop treating consensus reality as final and begin exploring the infinite spaces that lie beyond its walls. The crack appears whenever language fails, when you encounter something that can't be neatly named or categorized. It might happen in a psychedelic experience, where shapes melt and identities dissolve. Or in love, when words collapse under the weight of feeling. Or in death, where all meanings unravel. In those moments, the symbolic web that sustains the world trembles. The mind, desperate to maintain order, tries to reassert control. It names, it analyzes, it rationalizes. But something deeper resists. You realize that reality itself is not bound by human description, that beyond the linguistic grid lies a living field, fluid and self-aware. The crack is the invitation to meet that field directly, to experience existence without the filter of story. It is terrifying because the ego depends on stories to survive. When they dissolve, so does the illusion of me. This dissolution is what every mystic and every psychedelic traveler eventually faces, the confrontation with the unnameable. McKenna described it as a plunge into the cosmic ocean, where all boundaries disappear. The self is no longer a separate observer, but a current within the flow. At first, it feels like annihilation. The structures of culture, the familiar narratives of time and self, begin to crumble. You can't tell if you're dying or awakening. But as the fear subsides, something extraordinary happens. You realize that what's dying is not you, but the illusion of separateness. Behind it, there is only presence, vast, intelligent, luminous. The universe reveals itself as a self-aware organism, dreaming endlessly through form. The crack becomes a doorway, and through it, you glimpse the truth that all realities are permeable. All worlds are woven from mind. To reach that doorway, though, you must first let go of certainty. The consensus hallucination thrives on certainty. It feeds on the conviction that things are what they seem. But certainty is the enemy of discovery. The moment you question the solidity of the world, you begin to notice its instability. Objects shimmer, meanings fluctuate, coincidences multiply. Synchronicities start appearing, events so perfectly timed that they seem orchestrated by an unseen intelligence. The linear narrative begins to fracture. Time no longer feels like a straight line, but like a spiral, looping through patterns of meaning. You start to sense that consciousness itself might be the primary substance of reality, and that matter is simply its most consistent dream. This realization is disorienting, even dangerous. Culture will call it madness. But madness, in this context, is simply the refusal to remain hypnotized. McKenna warned that slipping through the crack requires courage because it exposes the fragile scaffolding of our entire worldview. To see through the illusion is to see the machinery of meaning, how governments, religions, economies, and even science are built upon collective agreement. These agreements function only as long as we all participate. When enough people glimpse the cracks, the illusion begins to falter. That's why societies fear visionaries. A poet who describes reality as fluid threatens the banks that rely on stability. A mystic who proclaims unity threatens the hierarchies that depend on division. And yet, this tension between illusion and awakening is the creative engine of evolution. Every paradigm shift, every leap in consciousness, begins with someone daring to look through the crack and report what they saw. What they often report is not chaos, but deeper order, a self-organizing intelligence underlying everything. The ancients called it Logos, Tao, Brahman, the great mystery. It is the living pattern that speaks through dreams, symbols, and synchronicity. When you tune into it, the world stops being a collection of inert objects and becomes a conversation. The wind whispers, the trees respond, the stars pulse in rhythm with your heartbeat. The separation between observer and observed dissolves, and reality reveals itself as participatory. This is the shamanic insight, that we are co-creators, not spectators. The crack is not an escape from the world. It is the revelation that there was never a boundary between self and cosmos to begin with. When you look through it, you see that the entire hallucination of the real world was a teaching device, a fractal mirror designed to bring you back to yourself. Still, the temptation to seal the crack is strong. Once you've glimpsed the infinite, the old world can feel unbearably small. You may long to retreat into the familiar, to patch up the hole in the dream and pretend it never happened. But you can't unsee it. The awareness seeps through everything you do. Even as you return to work, to family, to the daily rituals of survival, a quiet knowing follows you. This isn't all there is. Every conversation, every object, every thought becomes translucent, revealing its symbolic nature. You see how words manipulate reality, how beliefs shape perception, how attention itself is a creative act. You begin to live with one foot in the consensus and one foot in the mystery. And slowly, a new kind of intelligence awakens, the intelligence of the lucid dreamer, the one who knows they are dreaming but continues to explore with wonder. Lucidity changes everything. It transforms fear into curiosity, control into participation. You no longer seek to dominate the world, because you understand that the world is not separate from you. You begin to navigate reality like a musician improvising with the cosmic rhythm. The crack becomes not a wound, but an instrument, a channel through which inspiration flows. Through it, art emerges, revelation emerges, compassion emerges. Because once you've seen the unity behind the illusion, you can no longer live as if others are merely characters in your story. You recognize them as reflections of the same awareness, lost and searching, dreaming within the same field of light. The hallucination becomes a shared canvas for awakening rather than a prison of belief. But make no mistake, the crack is not comfortable. It demands honesty. It strips away the masks we wear to survive the dream. It reveals the anxiety we conceal with routines, the fear we bury beneath ambition. It shows us that most of what we call progress is just movement within the same illusion. Yet, in that exposure, there is liberation. Because when everything false falls away, what remains is real in the deepest sense. Not real as in solid or permanent, but real as in alive, ever-changing, ever-present, irreducible. You begin to see that truth is not something to be possessed, but something to be lived. It moves through you like breath. It speaks in silence. It creates worlds through imagination and dissolves them in time. The crack is the reminder that nothing you believe is final, and that awakening is not a single event, but a continuous surrender to mystery. This is why McKenna insisted that the future of humanity depends on breaking the spell of the consensus trance. The more people who glimpse the crack, the more porous the collective hallucination becomes. New possibilities rush in. Old institutions crumble under the weight of their own unreality. Art, science, and spirituality begin to merge again into a single act of exploration. The shamanic imagination returns, not as superstition, but as an expanded mode of knowing. Humanity begins to dream consciously, and perhaps this is what the universe has always been doing, evolving dreamers capable of realizing they are dreaming. The crack, then, is not an accident, but the next stage of the story. Through it, the cosmos becomes aware of itself. In the end, the crack in the consensus is not a break, but a beginning. It's the birth canal of consciousness, the place where the old world dies and the real begins. Not the real of objects and definitions, but the real of direct experience, raw and unfiltered. To pass through it is to remember that reality is not something given, but something spoken, sung, danced into being. Terence McKenna often said that culture and language are not cages we must destroy, but instruments we must learn to play beautifully. Once you glimpse the mechanics of the spell, you stop being its prisoner and become its poet. The same words that once hypnotized you can now heal you. The same symbols that once trapped you in fear can now point to the infinite. What changes is not the world, but your relationship to it. The dream remains, but you become lucid within it. Awakening is not a sudden escape into transcendence. It's a slow remembering that you were never truly asleep. You begin to move differently through life, sensing the texture of meaning in each moment. The table in front of you, the voice on the phone, the breath in your lungs, all shimmer with significance. They are no longer mere things, but expressions of consciousness communicating with itself. From this silence, true thought arises, not conditioned by habit or fear. This silence is the birthplace of creativity. It is the moment when you stop reacting to the hallucination and start composing within it. You realize that imagination is the fundamental act of consciousness, that the world is not discovered, but continually invented through attention. To awaken, then, is to reclaim imagination from the machinery of culture. Society has taught us to outsource our dreaming, to consume rather than create, to obey narratives instead of telling them. But when you awaken, the creative power returns. You become an artist of reality itself. You no longer seek validation from the collective hallucination because you see it as malleable, a construct designed to evolve. You paint new meanings into it through your actions, words, and visions. And because consciousness is fractal, each small act of awakening reverberates through the whole system. Every time one person begins to see clearly, the texture of the dream changes for everyone else. The consensus becomes more fluid, more compassionate, more alive. This is not a passive enlightenment. It's an active dance with the dream. You begin to engage with culture as a co-creator, not a victim. You use its symbols consciously, bending them toward beauty and truth rather than control. You may still participate in the rituals of society, its jobs, its technologies, its conversations, but your relationship with them is transformed. They are no longer prisons of meaning, but materials for creation. You can speak the language of the world without being bound by it, because you understand that words are masks worn by silence, that every form hides a formless center. You become like a lucid dreamer who plays within the dream, not fooled by its drama, yet fully immersed in its wonder. McKenna often compared this state to surfing chaos, rather than drowning in it. The world remains unpredictable, but you learn to ride its waves. You understand that uncertainty is not an error in the system, it is the system's vitality. The hallucination thrives on novelty, and you become a partner in its evolution. Instead of resisting change, you begin to flow with it, shaping and being shaped. The ego, once terrified of dissolution, transforms into a flexible instrument, an interface for creative expression. It still speaks, acts, and desires, but no longer claims ownership. It becomes transparent, a lens through which the universe perceives itself. You realize that your individuality is not separate from the whole, but a unique pattern in the infinite field of being. In this awareness, compassion naturally arises, because once you see that every being is another facet of the same consciousness, how could you harm another without harming yourself? The walls between me and you dissolve. Even conflict begins to look like a dialogue between two aspects of one dreaming mind. You stop needing to win and start seeking to understand. You listen not just with your ears, but with your presence. Each encounter becomes sacred, each conversation a meeting between mirrors. The awakened person does not withdraw from the world. They lean into it with open eyes and open heart, knowing that every moment is the universe teaching itself how to love. Love, in this sense, is not sentimentality, but the recognition of unity through multiplicity. It is the heartbeat of the dream itself. As awakening deepens, you start to see that the hallucination was never meant to be escaped, only understood. Reality is not a trap, it is a riddle. It was never trying to deceive you, it was trying to initiate you. The illusions of culture, language, and self were not mistakes. They were part of a cosmic learning process, a way for consciousness to explore its own possibilities. The moment you understand this, resentment dissolves. You forgive the world for its confusion because you recognize it as your own. You forgive yourself for being lost, for being human, for needing the dream to wake up. The world becomes transparent to its source. You walk through it, knowing that every shadow hides light, every form hides spirit, every moment hides eternity. Awakening is not about transcending life. It's about inhabiting it completely. To live awakened is to become a bridge between worlds. One foot remains in the ordinary, the other in the infinite. You cook breakfast, answer emails, speak to strangers, but beneath every act flows a deep current of awareness. You sense the intelligence pulsing through every interaction. Even pain becomes part of the dance. Suffering is no longer an enemy, but a teacher, another way the universe guides you toward clarity. Each experience, pleasant or painful, becomes a thread in the great tapestry of being. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What is this showing me?" The question itself becomes a doorway to presence. And from that presence, life begins to organize itself in harmony with your awareness. When you speak, your words carry resonance. When you act, your gestures ripple through the collective dream. The world responds, subtly at first, then unmistakably. Synchronicities multiply. Ideas find their timing. You begin to feel that you are being guided, though by what, you can't quite say. McKenna would call it the felt presence of direct experience, the voice of the universe speaking through intuition, dreams, and coincidence. It's not separate from you, but neither is it under your control. It's a conversation between the human and the divine, the finite and the infinite. The more you listen, the more you realize that awakening is not a destination, but an ongoing dialogue. The world keeps whispering new layers of meaning, and you keep responding in kind. Together, you compose the next version of reality. Eventually, You understand that awakening and the hallucination are not opposites. They are partners. The illusion provides the canvas. The awakening provides the vision. Without the dream, there would be nothing to awaken from. Without awakening, the dream would stagnate. The two are eternally intertwined, like light and shadow, sound and silence. This is the secret the mystics have always known. Enlightenment is not escape, it's participation. It's living the illusion consciously, knowing it's a play, yet loving it deeply. You become both actor and witness, both story and storyteller. The hallucination becomes your medium for creation, and through you, the universe discovers new ways to express itself. And so, the awakened life is not the end of the journey, it's the beginning of true play. You speak, create, love, and explore, no longer bound by fear. You know the world is a hallucination, yes, but a sacred one, a masterpiece of divine imagination. You are no longer caught in the trance of meaning. You are the meaning maker. You are the language learning to sing itself into harmony. You are the dream awakening to its own beauty. And as McKenna once said, we must all become artists of our own lives, because the future is not something that happens to us. It is something we create. The shared hallucination continues, but now it glows from within, illuminated by awareness. And that, perhaps, is the true freedom. Not to escape the dream, but to dream it knowingly, joyfully, and with love. At the end of the journey, after the illusions have been seen through and the veils have thinned, something indescribable begins to reveal itself, the infinite behind the illusion. It is not a distant heaven or a hidden dimension. It is the quiet presence that has always been here, watching through your eyes, breathing through your lungs, dreaming through your thoughts. When McKenna spoke about reality as a shared hallucination, he never meant that nothing is real. He meant that the way we interpret reality, the story we agree upon, is an illusion. But behind that shared dream lies something more ancient and immeasurable, something so immediate and self-evident that it cannot be captured by words. It is the luminous field of consciousness itself, the source from which all appearances rise and fall. When you finally see this, the game changes completely. Life no longer appears as a maze of confusion, but as a dance of divine imagination, unfolding itself through infinite forms. To touch the infinite is to be stripped bare of everything you thought you were. The world you once called real becomes transparent, like a film projected onto the vast screen of awareness. The objects, people, emotions, all still appear, but now they shimmer with impermanence. You see that everything is in motion, everything is becoming, everything is alive. Even the stones and the stars seem to breathe. What we call matter reveals itself as slowed down light, a vibration condensed into temporary form. Time, once the great ruler of our existence, loses its authority. It's no longer a linear march, but a spiral of unfolding moments, each one containing the entire cosmos. You realize that the infinite is not beyond time. It is what time is happening in. The universe is not moving through space. Space is moving through consciousness. And then a great laughter rises inside you. Not the laughter of mockery, but the laughter of recognition. You see the cosmic joke, that you have been looking for truth as if it were hidden somewhere far away, while all along it was the one looking. The seeker and the sought dissolve into the same awareness. The hallucination of separation collapses, and what remains is a vast, silent joy. You see that the infinite has never been absent, that it was wearing all the masks you called the world. Every face, every object, every sound was an expression of it. Even the confusion, the wars, the longing, all of it was the infinite exploring itself through limitation. The dream was never a mistake. It was the way the boundless learned to taste itself, to see its own reflection in the mirror of form. In this seeing, fear begins to dissolve. Because what can the infinite lose? What can die if nothing was ever separate? The body may fade, civilizations may crumble, galaxies may burn out, but the awareness behind it all remains untouched. It is not born. It does not die. It simply is. This realization does not make you detached from life. It makes you fall in love with it more deeply than ever. Every leaf, every drop of water, every human gesture becomes holy. The ordinary turns radiant because you finally understand that there is no such thing as ordinary. The infinite hides in plain sight, in the curve of a smile, in the texture of sunlight on skin, in the rhythm of your own heartbeat. The sacred was never in temples or scriptures. It was always in your direct experience, waiting for you to notice. Yet this awakening does not end the hallucination. It transforms it. You still live in a world of language, culture, and story, but now you navigate it like a lucid dreamer. You see the cultural trance for what it is, a necessary fiction, a stage for consciousness to play out its infinite creativity. You no longer mistake the play for reality, but you also don't reject it. You bow to its artistry. The human world, with all its chaos and beauty, becomes the cosmos expressing itself in microcosm. You realize that evolution, art, technology, even suffering, are ways the infinite learns more about itself. The shared hallucination becomes a theater of awakening, a story the universe tells itself to remember its own name. And you are both the actor and the audience, the script and the stage, the silence and the sound. McKenna often said that the purpose of life is not to find meaning, but to experience meaning. The way a musician experiences music, not by explaining it, but by playing it. The infinite behind the illusion is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be lived. It's the silent awareness that hears the melody and the melody itself. When you awaken to this, even the act of breathing feels like a prayer. You no longer look for God in the heavens. You feel God exhaling through you. You realize that every thought, every emotion, every atom is part of a vast, intelligent harmony. The hallucination of the real world becomes a dance of divine geometry, fractal, self-reflecting, endlessly creative. The cosmos is not a cold machine, but a living poem, written in the language of light and experienced through the medium of consciousness. But the infinite does not erase individuality, it reframes it. You begin to understand that your uniqueness is not separate from the whole, but a necessary expression of it. Just as each wave is distinct yet inseparable from the ocean, your particular perspective is how the infinite sees itself from one angle. To reject individuality would be to reject one of the infinite's own faces. So you live both truths at once, the unity behind all things and the diversity within it. This paradox is the essence of awakening, to be both everything and something, both vast and specific, both silence and song. The ego no longer stands in opposition to the universe. It becomes a note in the cosmic symphony. And when you listen closely, you can hear the music everywhere, in the hum of electricity, in the laughter of strangers, in the quiet between words. The awareness of the infinite brings with it a profound responsibility. Once you see that the world is alive and conscious, you can no longer treat it as inert matter. You understand that every action reverberates through the web of being. The environment, society, and the inner psyche are not separate. They are different dimensions of the same organism. To harm one is to wound the whole. Awakening is not retreating into bliss, but entering the world more consciously, more lovingly. It's living with the understanding that every choice is creative, every perception is participatory. You become a steward of the dream, tending to it with care. The awakened being does not escape the hallucination. They beautify it, infuse it with awareness. They plant compassion where there was indifference, art where there was monotony, and presence where there was absence. This is what McKenna meant by reclaiming the felt presence of direct experience. It's the realization that the real miracle is not hidden in some distant metaphysical realm, but in the immediacy of now. Every instant is an opportunity to rediscover the infinite. The sunrise is not an event in time. It is eternity appearing as color. The sound of a child laughing is not noise. It is the universe delighting in itself. When you awaken to this, Gratitude becomes your natural state. You know you can't look at it because you are it. The infinite is the one looking through all eyes, thinking through all minds, loving through all hearts. When you know this, not intellectually, but experientially, the fear of death dissolves, the anxiety of meaning fades, and life becomes a continuous act of creation. You live as both the dreamer and the dream, both the question and the answer. The world continues to shimmer in its diversity, but you recognize the same light pulsing behind every form. And you understand that the purpose of this shared hallucination was never to trap you. It was to awaken you to the unimaginable truth that the dreamer and the dreamed were never separate. They were one infinite consciousness, forever playing hide and seek with itself across the dimensions of time. That is the final revelation. Reality is not an illusion to escape, but a mystery to celebrate. What you call the real world is the divine imagining itself into being, moment by moment, through every breath, every thought, every cell. The hallucination was only the surface of a deeper beauty, the infinite teaching itself, the art of being. When you awaken to that, you don't leave the dream. You fall in love with it completely.